about cannabis in Canada and about what's happening in the rest of the world. Like in Australia, there's more or less a sort of conspiracy of silence on the way the drug laws are falling and prohibition is falling in the rest of the world, and we just don't hear about it. And that seems to be the way that the Murdoch press operates in Australia. People become unpersoned so that you never hear about Drew Hutton or Lock the Gate or even Alan Jones they don't even mention. And they don't mention the fact that the cannabis laws are falling all throughout the planet. And so that's what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about one of those countries, which is Canada. Now, even in those countries where you are getting reform, there are lots of problems which Dana and May will talk about. Anyway, to introduce Dana first. Dana Larsen is a Canadian author, politician and cannabis legalization activist. He was the editor of Cannabis Culture magazine from 1994 until 2005 and a founding member of the Marijuana Party of Canada. In 2003 he resigned from the Marijuana Party and joined the New Democratic Party. In 2006 he co-founded the Vancouver Seed Bank, a business which sells many seed varieties by mail order, including banned plants such as cannabis, poppies, peyote and coca. Sounds very interesting. In November 2008, the Vancouver Medical Cannabis Dispensary, of which Dana was a director, opened almost next door to the Vancouver Seed Bank. In 2012, he launched the Sensibles BC campaign to decriminalise cannabis possession in British Columbia through a referendum. And in 2013, he was named one of the 50 most influential peoples in Vancouver. Dana has just completed his Overgrow the Government tour of Canada, distributing bags of cannabis seed to those who want to grow cannabis for medicine. And I think if you look at the poster, you can see Dana with one of those bags, looking quite delighted. Anyway, without further ado, here is Dana Larsen.
Cool day in Australia. It feels like the middle of summer to me, but I guess that's not the way it is down here. But it's wonderful to be in Australia. It was great to be in Nimbin for the Mardi Gras. That was a wonderful event. I first attended that in the 1990s for some of the early ones, and it was great seeing how that town has sustained its wonderful energy and kept the cannabis freedom movement going all these years in the face of some pretty harsh adversity. We had to go through those roadblocks a few times coming in where they're swabbing and probing and testing everybody for any cannabis residues, and that wasn't so fun. But other than that, it was a great event and a great gathering, and it's really nice to be here. And so I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Canada, where we've come over the last 20, 25 years or so, and maybe some of the techniques and things that we've used there to make change can be inspiring to help make change happen here in Australia. I first got involved in the cannabis movement as a young man, and I've really been doing this kind of work my whole life. As a university student, I started a club on our campus called the League for Ethical Action on Drugs, and we promoted drug reform and brought speakers to our university and helped put on some events. After I graduated from university, I met a guy named Marc Emery who had just moved to Vancouver and opened up a store called Hemp BC. That was a very controversial store. You know, people think of Vancouver as some kind of global marijuana mecca, but in the mid-90s, things were very rough in Canada. Our last Conservative Prime Minister had just passed some very strict censorship laws and prohibition laws against bongs and pipes and vaporizers and cannabis-related magazines and books and things like that. Laws which are still on the books in Canada, by the way, and still get enforced sometimes, but like a lot of Canada's marijuana laws, they get ignored most of the time by the police, and a lot of people aren't even aware these laws are still on the books anymore, which I would credit as a testament to the civil disobedience campaign we've been engaged in. But Marc opened his Hemp BC store and began selling bongs and pipes and marijuana-related literature in defiance of Canadian law very openly, and began wholesaling to other stores. And we saw a movement start to happen in Canada in the mid-90s that combined business and civil disobedience and activism together into what I think is a very potent, very powerful, and effective combination. This idea of creating businesses that are in and of themselves revolutionary, violating the law in ways that you find the weak points in the system, that you can make some progress, and you use the profits from those businesses to further fund activism and social change. And that has been really, over the last 20 years, I think, the most powerful tool we've had in Canada for making change. That and our Charter of Rights, which is something that you're lacking here in Australia, my understanding of your legal system. And our current Prime Minister is a guy named Justin Trudeau, and his dad was also our Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, and Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister during the late 70s. And Trudeau was the one who introduced the Charter of Rights into Canada, and it's been that document that has allowed us to win so many court cases, to force the government to start growing medical cannabis, and has allowed judges to give activists the low end of the penalties when it comes to breaking the law. So in the mid-90s, we saw dozens of these bong shops or hemp stores or head shops, whatever you want to call them, opening up across Canada in defiance of the federal laws. And people would get raided all the time. Police would come in and bust people for selling bongs. People would go to jail for the weekend. They'd lose their livelihood. Their store would get raided and that. But they would do everything they could to reopen again and to stay in business. And like I said, because when they'd go to court, judges would go, well, you were selling bongs? Okay, I'll give you a $1,000 fine, or I'll give you community service. And so the cops go, wait a minute, it cost us $35,000 to raid that guy, and another $50,000 to go to court and get a conviction, and he's only got to pay a $2,000 fine. And in the meantime, 4 other bong shops opened up in that city while we were going after that one guy. And so they kind of gave up. It took several years, and a lot of folks paid some pretty severe prices, but by the early 2000s, bong shop raids had pretty much stopped in Canada. And I think the police noted that when they went after a bong shop, all they got was grief from their communities and activists coming out and telling them what a bunch of idiots they were, and letters in the paper from people saying, why are my tax-paying dollars going to raiding bong shops and head shops? And they still get raided in Canada, don't get me wrong, but it's only once or twice a year in some small town where these kind of laws get enforced. By and large, in big cities and major parts of the country, people aren't even aware that bongs are still against the law. They're not aware that High Times magazine and Cannabis Culture magazine and websites that promote marijuana use are against the law in Canada. These laws are still on the books, like I said, but by and large they get ignored because of our civil disobedience campaign has been so successful. And what started with bongs and pipes and evolved into selling cannabis seeds, another thing that's against the law in Canada and still is. And Marc Emery and others began selling seeds to other Canadians, and Marc would also do it by mail order around the world and into the US, and ultimately he was charged under American law and given a 4.5-year prison term in American prison for selling seeds to Americans. But at the same time, across Canada, there's seed banks now operating. Most of them don't send to the US anymore, but other than that, there's seeds being sold all across Canada very openly. The law remains on the books, but it is very rarely enforced because we're devoted, we're committed to reopening again, and the courts aren't willing to give us severe enough punishments to make people want to stop and give up what they're doing. And so, we saw the seed revolution happen, and then the current revolution that's coming this way in Canada and really across our whole country is the dispensary, the cannabis dispensary revolution. And that's something that I'm proud to have been one of the people to help get that going. We had medical marijuana outlets opening in Vancouver 15, 18 years ago. Some of them have been open now 20 years, same in Toronto. But these first ones, perhaps wisely, were very discreet in their operation and very quiet about what they were doing. And the police and city council knew they were selling cannabis to those in need, but they kept very strict effort to keep out those who did not have a documented medical need and to try to make sure everyone they were providing cannabis to had a doctor's recommendation or had a need. Still illegal in Canada to do this, but once again, when some of them would get raided and go to court, judges would say, well, people need medical cannabis. You've been proving that to me. And the federal government's medical marijuana program, well, in the beginning it was non-existent, and now they'll say, well, it doesn't really work very well. It's got a lot of flaws in it, so they're unwilling to put people in prison for selling medical cannabis in Canada. And when they do get charged, some friends of mine tried to open a dispensary in Burnaby, which is a city right next to Vancouver. They ended up getting shut down by the RCMP, and they pled guilty and had their hearing, and for sentencing they got a fine and they got community service. And they did that community service working with my activist group, Sensible BC, at our office. And so they were able to do their community service and keep pushing for something they believed in. And in fact, one of the women who opened that place now runs a successful vapor lounge in the city of Hamilton in Ontario. So she didn't give up. She wanted to make a contribution and to get involved in the cannabis business revolution, and she did that. She found a way. The dispensary didn't work, but the vapor lounge did. Now, I know that these things are perhaps different in Australia, and that some of the laws here are more strict, and that you don't have the same kind of legal protection for your activism, but I do think that the way to make successful change happen is to find those weak spots in the system where you can show how ridiculous the law is, where you can violate the law in an open and transparent way, and where hopefully you can make a profit doing that in some way. Not in a seedy way, but in a positive, transparent way. You know, I've got a number of businesses I started in Vancouver, and one is selling marijuana creams and salves. Now, these things have got THC in them. We make them out of bubble hash, and they're not extremely high levels of cannabinoids. You don't need a lot of cannabis in there to have a very positive effect for pain relief, for skin conditions like psoriasis or eczema, are wonderfully treated with these creams. People tell me all the time they've got incredible chronic pain and how wonderful these creams are to help them. Well, technically selling these creams is like selling marijuana, but in practical terms, nobody's getting high. The cannabinoid levels in there are pretty low, and so I sell them openly in Canada. No one's bothered me about that, and I would love to see, in fact, I have seen people in Nimbin and elsewhere selling these kind of creams and these kind of products. I think that's a good way of getting in there, because yeah, they might charge you, you might go to court, and I'm not sure how it would play out, but I can't see the court system giving you the same kind of treatment for selling a cannabis-infused cream with no psychoactivity, especially if you focus on CBD aspects and try to make a CBD-based thing. You know, so finding those weaknesses in the system where you can show people, look, cannabis is helpful, it's beneficial, this cream isn't getting anybody high, but it's producing a lot of pain relief, it's helping a lot of skincare. Why is this illegal? You know, so there's ways of violating the law and engaging in civil disobedience that can be effective and maybe don't come around with those same kind of penalties. We're seeing an expansion in Canada of vapor lounges as well, places where cannabis users can go safely and use cannabis in a social environment. Sometimes they can rent a vaporizer, a volcano, or some other vaporizer, or you can rent a bong, or you can just hang out and smoke a joint. And you know, once again, I'm not sure exactly what your smoking bylaws are like here, but most Canadian cities that ban smoking only ban tobacco smoking very clearly. They only limit tobacco smoking. And so although the police could come in, and maybe they would, and harass your clients and your customers for possession of a few grams they have in your pocket, by and large, that gets pretty tired pretty quickly. And creating a safe space for users to go, I mean, you say, well, would you rather we smoke on the street or in the park, or trying to get people into a safe environment out of that situation? And that can also be a very successful business and a way of helping to change the law, or to defy the law, and show how ridiculous those kind of things are. But I do think that civil disobedience is really an effective technique. It's the way that you get change to happen. And in Canada, we're now on the verge of legalization. You've got our Prime Minister Trudeau, who was elected largely on a promise to legalize cannabis in Canada. He hasn't done a single thing yet to make that happen. In fact, we're still living under the very strict mandatory minimum jail sentences for cultivation of just a few plants, or selling or buying just relatively small amounts of marijuana. These laws are passed by his conservative predecessor. But at the same time, we're very close to legalization, and I don't think it's because we've elected Trudeau. I think it's because so many Canadians now are standing up against these laws that we are very literally overgrowing the government and their ability to respond and to arrest people. They said there's over 150 dispensaries in Vancouver now, and about that many or more in the city of Toronto. Many small towns across Canada have got dispensaries opening up. And a lot of them get raided, don't get me wrong. People have been charged, they've come after them, but new ones just keep opening up. People are not willing to back down. And even the ones that get raided often get reopened. In the city of Nanaimo, which is a pretty small city on Vancouver Island, there was 10 dispensaries operating in this city that had opened up, 10 different medical marijuana outlets. And when there was one or two, it was easy for them to kind of turn a blind eye or not talk about it. But when there was 10, the city council started saying, we got to do something about this. We got to shut these places down. The RCMP, Canada's police force, they went around to all 10 dispensaries and threatened them. Said, we're going to come back. If you're not shut down, we're going to raid you and shut you down. So they all said, okay, we're going to hide some of our marijuana and try to batten down the hatches a little bit. And a couple of weeks later, the police went in and they raided 3 dispensaries in one day. We figure that cost about $100,000 out of the Nanaimo policing budget to raid those 3 dispensaries. And interestingly, just a few months earlier, the Nanaimo police have been asking for more money, and they've been turned down by city council, saying we can't afford to meet your increasing budget demands. But they blew $100,000 raiding 3 dispensaries, and all 3 reopened the next day. And luckily in Canada, they've been charged. When they go to court to get fingerprinted, they get told, oh, nobody actually called us about this, and just come back later, we'll deal with it later. They show up a few weeks later for their hearing, they get told the same thing, oh, we don't actually have anything down for you here, nothing's really happening, and they're basically not willing to drop the charges. They look foolish, but they don't really want to go forward because they know it's not going to go anywhere, and they know that under our system, no one's really going to get penalized, and it's just going to be a big joke. So they just kind of hold on to those charges for a while. But in the meantime, shortly after that happened, Nanaimo City Council put out a press release saying, we're going to look at regulating dispensaries now. We've decided that raiding them is probably not the best idea. After blowing $100,000 out of our policing budget to accomplish absolutely nothing, they've changed their mind. And so it takes this kind of mass civil disobedience, of people standing up in large numbers. And, you know, it's easy when there's 10 other people all doing it who have got stores to be number 11 or number 12. The scary part is being number 1, being the first person out there to put up that shingle, or the person to be out there to defy those laws openly and to stand up. And it is hard, I tell you. It's not easy to do that kind of stuff and to face the legal penalties and the risk of persecution and the potential loss of your freedom. And if you're not willing to do that yourself, that's okay. But when you see someone else doing that, make sure you get out there and support that person. Make sure you get out there to stand up to them so that they're not alone and not by themselves. And although I talk about civil disobedience, and I think that is the primary way of changing these laws, whether it's gathering in groups like Nimbin and celebrating cannabis, which is forbidden, whether it's opening businesses, whether it's just talking about cannabis, there is other ways of making change as well than letting your voice be heard. I got a friend of mine who lives in Ottawa, Canada's capital city. His name's Russell Barth. And Russell's not a very healthy guy. Asia knows Russell. Russell's not a very healthy guy. He's got a lot of physical challenges. His wife also has got some very severe health issues, and they spend a lot of their time at home and use medical cannabis to keep themselves alive. And they both say without cannabis medicine, they wouldn't be here anymore. And Russell writes letters to the editor. Russell, every week or so, he'll go online, he'll find a couple of news stories that annoy him or that bother him about cannabis. He won't just write a comment in the comment section online. He'll write a letter to the editor. And his letters are usually short and very poignant and clever, and he has been published so many times. He is Canada's most published author of letters to the editor on any topic at all. Russell Barth, the marijuana author. He has reached literally millions of people across our country and around the world, because he writes to other papers around the world too, mostly in Canada, but he's been in American papers and other papers. He has reached millions of people with his message of the positive aspects of cannabis and how prohibition is wrong. And he does that only a few hours a week from his own home, from his living room. And I think that's such an amazing testament to persistence and to persnicketiness and to his desire to get his message out there. And he's reached so many people in such an easy way. And so many of us have got so many less challenges than Russell Barth has, but we actually do perhaps even less than what he's doing. And that, to me, is kind of sad, that people who have the ability to get out there and make a change, but they're scared, or they don't know what to do, or they don't know how to make change happen. I launched a big campaign in British Columbia, John mentioned it, called Sensible BC. In BC, we have a referendum system like many American states have, where you get enough signatures, you can force something to go onto the ballot. But unlike the American states, British Columbia's system is totally inaccessible, very, very difficult to get on the ballot. Only one vote has ever succeeded in getting on our ballot ever in BC history. That's how hard it is. And our campaign came in second. We didn't get on the ballot, but we got the second most signatures anybody had ever gathered. And certainly it would have been enough to qualify in any American state, but not in any American state, so we didn't qualify. But what I remember most about that campaign, because it involved thousands of people getting involved, and 4,000 people signed up to gather signatures around the province. And what I remember most during that campaign and after that campaign was how many people thanked me for giving them something to do. And I'm kind of a person who's almost reluctant to ask for help. I tend to be, I'll just do it myself. I don't like asking people for help or asking them to make sacrifices. I'll just do that stuff, right? And so asking people to help and get involved is hard for me sometimes, but seeing how many people were so grateful for the chance to do something, and I heard over and over again from people, I've wanted to get involved for years, I love cannabis, I believe prohibition is wrong, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. I live in a small town, or I've got a family, or I've got a situation that makes it worrisome for me, or I just don't know how to get involved. And I was so happy to be able to give people this chance to do something and to get involved and to make a difference, and a chance to talk about cannabis openly with their neighbors and with their family and friends, and to have that conversation, which is often difficult to have out of the blue, to bring it up. Hey, Mom, you know that I smoke pot and we should legalize it and it's really good. You should probably use it too. That conversation is not always easy to have. And when you've got a campaign or a formal structure around that, it allows people to get involved and feel like they're part of a team and part of a group. And so, you know, my lesson has been that there's so many people that want to get involved, but they're scared. They don't want to be the first one in the group. They want to be the fifth one in the group to get out there. They don't want to necessarily lead, but they definitely want to be involved. And so, you know, but if you came here today, it's because because you want to get involved, and because you are someone who perhaps wants to take a leadership role in this campaign or wants to make that change happen. You know, for me, like, I love marijuana, and I think it's been one of the best decisions in my life to get involved in the cannabis culture and to use this plant and to have the health and emotional and spiritual benefits that using cannabis has given to me. And I want to give back to this plant, and I want to make sure that everybody around the world who wants to have access to cannabis or who loves it the way I do can have access to this plant and doesn't have to hide or be ashamed or worry about being charged or being arrested or any of that stuff. And this is really a global battle, you know. It's not just Canada, it's not just Australia, it's every country on earth, pretty much. This war on cannabis and cannabis users is happening. It's all around the planet. And when it ends over the next 10, 20 years, as we see the war on cannabis move into the past, as I believe is going to happen, it's going to happen all over the earth. And it's going to be different countries taking little steps in that right direction, because nobody wants to get too far ahead of everybody else, right? So you get little moves forward. Holland has been a leader for many years, although it's not legal there. And in fact, the model they have in Holland, the coffee shop kind of model, is very similar to what we're getting in Vancouver and across Canada with dispensaries, where it's the municipalities that are licensing these places because the federal law is so ridiculous and the cities simply can't enforce it. They just start doing their own thing. And we saw this in Holland, where Amsterdam and other cities allow coffee shops to proliferate, even though they're against federal law, and it creates this weird situation where if you're driving your cannabis shipment to a coffee shop or a dispensary and you get stopped by the police, they'll take it, they'll charge you for trafficking. If you get it into the dispensary in Vancouver or get it into the coffee shop in Holland, they can sell it out the front door, and that's fine as long as they follow the rules, the back door, front door policy. But we're seeing things changing all around the world a little bit at a time, and they're changing here in Australia too, and you're going to help make that change happen. But I really do think this is a global conflict, a global war, and that when we end this and we look back upon it, we will see what a ridiculous conflict it really was. And I hope that our children and grandchildren look back upon cannabis prohibition the way we look back upon so many other things that were accepted and normal at the time and now seem backwards and restrictive, and we feel we're more enlightened now that we've come to this new kind of a perception of things. And I think that the cannabis revolution will be the same way. And so, you know, I'm gonna end my talk with a little view forward into the future. I did this little thing when I was in Nimbin, and I want to do this here. And I want you to imagine yourself, you know, as a grandparent, or if you're already a grandparent, maybe as a great-grandparent in the future. And you're in the future, and your grandson or granddaughter is there, and they're getting ready to go to school, and they're cramming for an exam before school, and they're flipping through their history book, and they turn to you and they say, "Grandma, Granddad, I'm reading in my history book here that cannabis used to be illegal for like 100 years all around the world, in Australia and everywhere else. This plant was banned. People would go to jail for it, and lives were ruined. Trillions of dollars are spent all over the earth. There was huge advertising campaigns against this plant. It was a really big thing, and that doesn't make any sense to me. You know, I want your grandchild to say that doesn't make any sense to me, because I know that the book that I'm reading this history in is printed on hemp paper. I know that I had hemp seed granola for breakfast. I know that you use marijuana medicines to treat the aches and pains of being a senior citizen. I know that we grow a little patch of cannabis in our yard, and I love working on those plants with you. And I know that the bus that takes me to school is fueled on hemp seed diesel. I know that the school I learn in is built with hemp fiber board, and even the bus is built with hemp materials to build that bus. And so this plant that's in every part of our lives in such a big way, how could this plant have been illegal for 100 years? How could this prohibition have been going on for so long? And I want you to be able to say, yeah, it's true. When I grew up, cannabis was illegal for most of my life, and maybe myself or my friends went to jail and were punished for using cannabis. We had to hide and pretend we didn't use cannabis and be secretive about it. And many people I knew who could use cannabis medicines couldn't get them and had to live and die in pain because they weren't allowed to use this plant. And it was a very dark time in our country and in our planet, really, when this plant was banned for so long. But I want you to be able to say, you know what? I did something to change those laws. I got involved and I made a difference to end cannabis prohibition. I wrote letters to the editor, I marched in rallies, I talked to politicians, I helped open a dispensary, I did something, I sacrificed something, I took some risk, I gave something to make a difference so that those laws would end. And what a great day it was when cannabis prohibition finally ended and we knew that we never again had to be afraid about our love for this plant. We never had to hide the fact that we were cannabis users. And I remember when the prisons opened and my friends who had been in jail for cannabis use and for cannabis growing and for their love of this plant were released. And what a wonderful day that was when that change happened. And you know, we made those sacrifices and we did those things so that the next generations would never have to know what it is to be ashamed or to have to hide what herbal medicine you use or to fear arrest or persecution for what plants you choose to grow in your garden. And that's the legacy that I want to leave to my kids and my grandkids, and I hope that you do too. And I hope that you will join me and join the people all around the world who are fighting against these laws, many of them in much more adverse conditions than you face here. People are making those sacrifices all around the world because they love cannabis, because they believe in this plant, and because they know that prohibition is wrong, and they know the harm that these laws do all around the world to so many people. And so I think that we're going to make this happen. You know, when I first got involved as a cannabis activist 25 years ago, people said, why do you care? It's going to happen, and it's going to be legalized any day now anyways. It's inevitable they're going to legalize it. It's definitely going to happen. And I think back to the 1970s, where in Canada and the US, we thought we were about to legalize it. So in Canada, we had Pierre Trudeau, and our conservative leader, Joe Clark, also said marijuana should be decriminalized. And in the US, Jimmy Carter was saying it was time to change the marijuana laws, and many American states, like now, are voting to decriminalize cannabis and to loosen up penalties, and everyone thought we were almost there in the late 1970s. And instead, they elected Reagan in the US, and things changed, and many, whole generations have gone by, and these laws have really only gotten worse. But we have a chance now. I think around the world we are on the cusp of changing these laws. And what a glorious day it will be when we finally see these walls begin to fall and these laws begin to change one country after another. So that's going to happen. Hope you will join me in this campaign and this dream and do something to change these laws and to end prohibition in Australia and around the world. And that's all I got to say for now. So thanks very much for having me, and I'm happy to answer questions. You can clap, go ahead. I never stop for the applause lines. I always just keep talking, never give people a chance to clap. But I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know if Asia wants to say a few words, but that's where we are in Canada. That's a future that I'm looking forward to creating together with all of us. And once again, thanks for having us both here. I'll take some questions.
Going back to your kind of care cultural treatments.
If you want to. Oh, yeah, we can do that.
Just repeat.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, okay, we'll go ahead. Go ahead.
CBD, because they're saying that the Australian cannabis is all high THC. So when you're sourcing CBD, is that from the industrial sativa?
Yeah, so the question is about CBD and THC, right? So THC is the most well-known molecule in the cannabis. It's one of the most psychoactive and one of the first ones to be isolated. And CBD is a different chemical, cannabidiol. I have trouble pronouncing that one sometimes. Cannabidiol. CBD is very low psychoactivity, but also has a lot of medicinal value. Some American states have passed CBD-only laws where they only allow CBD and not THC. That to me is ridiculous. They should all be allowed. But in Canada and around the world, what we call industrial hemp is cannabis that has been bred to be low in THC and high in CBD. And when you grow cannabis for fiber, you grow very tall, skinny plants. You don't make much resin. You don't make much flowers at all. But when you grow cannabis for seed production, cannabis hemp for seed, which is almost all the hemp in Canada, is being grown for seed production. And the seeds are formed in the buds. So they grow plants that have big buds on them, big resinous colas, and they get fertilized by the male plants, and they make a lot of seeds. Now, those plants are making CBD medicine even when they're seeded. If you were to keep those plants and grow them sensimilla style and get rid of the male plants and they weren't fertilized, they'd produce even higher levels of resin and even more CBD. And so there's also breeders in Canada who are making indoor strains designed to be high in CBD as well. And they'll produce even more because you're growing them under lights and optimal conditions and everything like that. And CBD is especially effective for treating epilepsy and for certain other ailments, and especially the kids with epilepsy. A lot of them use high CBD strains. Now, I've actually written about Canada's hemp farmers and how much resin they produce, because our hemp farmers in Canada are producing more cannabis resin than all of our marijuana farmers are. And that kind of makes sense, because a marijuana guy is growing a warehouse or a basement or maybe some plants outdoors. They can't compete with farmers who are growing thousands of hectares and harvesting it with a tractor. It's just a whole different ball game, right? But under Canadian law, those farmers cannot harvest and keep that resin. They can only keep the seeds from the plant. Everything else has to get put back into the earth. A couple of farmers in Canada might not be doing that. Some of them actually gather up that resin and sell it underground to dispensaries like my own. But it's not easy to do. The equipment is not really there for it. They're having to develop their own technology and do it in secret, because it's against the rules. If they get caught keeping their resin, they get in big trouble and would lose their permit. But what I would like to see is those farmers able to keep that CBD resin and make it available medically. And since they're throwing it away right now, and they're still making enough money just off the seeds, they could sell that resin for a pretty low price and double or triple the value of their crop at the same time. So the farmers could see the value of their hemp crop increase drastically and still provide very pure CBD products at extremely low prices compared to what they're at now. Now, even better, our farmers should be able to grow any strain of cannabis they want, including high THC products, in which case they could produce very pure, high-quality medicinal THC, CBD, whatever you want, for pennies a gram. I mean, it would obliterate what's really the current black market if that could happen. If those prices were available, you could produce pure, very pure products that could be heavily taxed and still sold for 10% or less of what the current price is on the market now. So you asked about CBD specifically. I don't know if anybody in Australia is producing high CBD strains, although I would guess that a lot of the bushweed and outdoor cannabis that I've seen is probably higher in CBD than, it's still probably got a lot of THC, and it's probably got higher CBD levels than some of the stuff grown indoors under lights. In Canada, I actually just finished, I'm still in the middle of a big Overgrow Canada campaign. I've got access to buckets and buckets and buckets of these high CBD cannabis seeds. They produce a 5-foot tall plant with a big central cola. Like I said, if you grow it without any male plants, that cola on these ones will produce between 8 and 12% CBD. And I've given away over 1.5 million of these seeds across Canada by mail order and in person. I actually got charged with trafficking in cannabis seeds in the city of Calgary while I was on my tour. That was the second stop. I spent the night in jail after 20 years of civil disobedience and cannabis activism. My first arrest, my first night in jail for giving away cannabis seeds. I'll actually tell you the story, because we were at a big event and the cops came in and I was doing my talk and we had a bunch of seeds on the table in the hallway and people were picking up their seeds, but nobody was giving them out. They were just sitting on the table. And the police came and I just kept talking, figured if they wanted to do something they'd let me know. And then one of our volunteers went back to our van parked in the hotel parking lot to get some more seeds because we'd run out. So when he was alone, the police grabbed him there and tossed him into a police car and charged him with trafficking in cannabis seeds and grabbed our van. So I don't normally seek out to be arrested, but in that case, I marched outside with a big bunch of the people at this event. Well, 200 people were there to hear me talk and get seeds. And I said to the officers, well, you can't arrest this volunteer at my event without, I'm the guy giving out seeds, you gotta arrest me. And he was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, you're gonna. So I grabbed a bunch of cannabis seeds from the crowd and I gave it in people's hands and said, here's some seeds, here's some seeds. And they all started saying, I've got seeds, arrest me, arrest me. And the cops were like, eh. And so I had 6 seeds in my hand and I said, okay, look, I just trafficked seeds, I got seeds, you have to arrest me now. Normally I would not do that, but since he'd arrested one of my volunteers at the event, I couldn't let someone else be arrested at my event and not have myself get arrested. And it worked out because they dropped the charges on him and he was released later that night. But they kept me until morning. They told me they're actually seeking a mandatory minimum 6-month jail sentence on me for trafficking in these seeds. But the whole thing was actually very ridiculous. And I think that the most ridiculous aspect of it is that I had 6 seeds in my hand, which I said, you must arrest me for these. And that's the only evidence they had that I was actually trafficking in seeds, was the 6 seeds in my hand. And then when the police officer put me in the car, he took those seeds and put them in an evidence bag and sealed it all up. And they took me to the jail, held me overnight. And in the morning when I left, I filed my $1,000 bail, had my hearing and everything, promised not to possess cannabis or cannabis seeds, except when I'm at work at my medical marijuana dispensary, which is also illegal in Vancouver, probably just as illegal, if not more legal, than giving away seeds, but it shows how confused the laws are in Canada that I'm still allowed to possess and deal in cannabis and cannabis seeds only when I'm at work. As far as I'm concerned, I'm always at work. This is my life's work, so we'll see how that goes if it comes up again in court. But anyways, on the way out, I get my tie, I get my belt, and then they give me the evidence bag with the 6 seeds in it back to me. And I'm like, I just promised not to possess cannabis seeds. Are they going to jump on me when I take this bag or something? But I take the bag back gingerly and put it in my pocket and walked out of the police station. And so I've still got the seeds that they accused me of trafficking. And my lawyer says, bring them to the court hearing. We'll ask if they want them back at that point to have the evidence. But it's just a ridiculous situation, right? But I did 14 more stops in my tour. I had no other problems anywhere else. I've given away $1.5 million of these high CBD cannabis seeds, which is why I'm talking about this, because of the CBD question. And I do think that CBD has potential to really revolutionize things. And I know in Canada there's about to be a court case to get CBD off the schedule of banned substances, saying it has no psychoactive effect. Why is it banned? There's no rationale to ban this highly useful medicine. Not that something getting you high should be a reason to ban it either, but nevertheless, they're trying to get it off. And I think in the US, CBD is not specifically mentioned in their schedule. So some companies have been trying to sell CBD products. They still get in trouble from the DEA and they have conflicts, but it's kind of a weird gray area there as well. But if you've got hemp farming happening, having those hemp farmers being able to harvest the resins off their plant to make them available for medical use seems like a wonderful idea. And for the first time in Canada, our hemp farmers asked last year, can we please keep the CBD resin off our plants? And to me, that's more important than all this fighting over dispensaries and all the marches and rallies and everything else. Because if those hemp farmers can start harvesting and selling that CBD resin, it's a huge game changer for everybody. That makes literally tons of CBD resin available for Canadians at ridiculously low prices. And that's the future that I want to see. I want to see farmers growing cannabis. I want to see everybody being able to grow cannabis, but I think most people shouldn't have to grow their own medicine. You should be allowed to grow your own plants, but just like most of us don't bother to grow our own tomatoes or echinacea, you shouldn't have to grow your own cannabis. But I do think being able to grow your own is a huge part of the legalization equation. A long answer, rambling answer to a short question. Does anybody else have any questions they want to ask me? No more questions? We're doing those afterwards? Okay, well I'm done for now, but there's plenty of chance to chat later, and I guess Asia's up next. Do you want to introduce Asia?
Yeah.
All right, thank you everybody.